If you'll only look, then you will see on WCNTV.
Hello and welcome to today's edition of WCNTV. I'm your host, Rob Pugh, and I'm the publisher of Wisconsin Christian News, which is our primary ministry here. Wisconsin Christian News is a 48-page printed or online Christian newspaper distributed nationally, so it's not just for Wisconsin. And you can find out more at our website, wisconsinchristiannews.com. And our good friend Leighton Howerton, who also wrote our theme song there, will be telling you more about that during our break today. I'd also like to encourage all of you who are Facebook users to check out our Facebook page, Wisconsin Christian News, and there we post breaking news stories on a daily basis. And also check out WCNTV on Facebook. If you would be so kind as to like and share our pages, we would really appreciate that. This program is live every Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 3 Central Time, and you can watch it live at WCNTV.net, WCNTV.net, on any of our Facebook pages or on YouTube. Well, our topic today is tyranny. We've seen a lot of tyranny here in America, the land of the free, over the last few years. It seems to be getting worse during the COVID-19 pandemic, or maybe better stated, the control-us virus pandemic. Well, let's start off today with basic definition of tyranny. Webster's defines tyranny as arbitrary or despotic exercise of power, the exercise of power over subjects and others with a rigor not authorized by law or justice, or not requisite for the purposes of government. Hence, tyranny is often synonymous with cruelty and oppression. It's also cruel government or discipline, unresisted and cruel power, absolute monarchy, cruelly administered. So what are some examples of tyranny that we've seen here in America over the last few years? Well, there's the tyranny of the homosexual agenda, wherein 3% of the population have dictated what all of us must now accept, embrace, and celebrate under color of law. We've seen the bakers, florists, photographers, and many others who've tried to exercise their deeply held Christian faith, and they've lost everything for it through persecution and prosecution because of their convictions. And that all morphed into the transgender agenda, where even fewer than 3% of the population, it's actually 0.6%, must now be obeyed or else. Most recently, we've seen the tyranny of federal and state government officials as they've responded to the pandemic and draconian rules and unjust edicts. They've put millions under house arrest. They've shut down small businesses while allowing large corporations and big box stores to continue operating. They forced us to social distance, wear masks, and in some cases, forbidden us to travel or even leave our homes. They forced churches to close their doors, but have left Islamic mosques untouched. In Chicago, the mayor there has launched an all-out assault on churches and forbidding them to gather, threatening to even bulldoze churches if they don't cancel their services. And she's not alone. In Mississippi recently, a church was firebombed because they refused to cancel their services. And the government is now implementing contact tracing. That's not going to be a good thing. This is where free citizens are actually going to lose pretty much all semblance of privacy. Donald Trump has been preparing our military to help distribute 330 million doses of this new vaccine, which may or may not include a microchip implant. We've been told the vaccine will not be mandatory, but I wouldn't hold your breath on that. Our troops have been mobilized to assist FEMA, another tyrannical government agency. Some of their plans certainly look like tyranny to me. And even as some areas of our country begin to reopen, many businesses are forcing patrons to wear a mask in order to be allowed to enter. So where is this all going to end? Well, our guest today is William J. Federer, a nationally known speaker, best-selling author, researcher, and president of Amerisearch Incorporated, publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage. Bill's American Minute radio program is broadcast daily across the country and on the internet. His Faith and History television program airs on the TCT network and on stations nationwide through DirecTV. You might have seen Bill on C-SPAN, Fox News, Hannity and Combs, The O'Reilly Factor, NPR, or many other network programs. Or you might have heard him on the radio, Janet Parshall's America, The Michael Medved Show, D. James Kennedy's Truths That Transform, VCY America's Crosstalk, or on Family Life Radio, USA Radio Network, or on any number of other radio stations and programs. He's also been a featured guest speaker at countless conferences and events around the country, including our own here in Wisconsin just a few years ago. You can learn more about Bill's research, his books, his TV and radio features, and much more at his website, which is AmericanMinute.com. Bill, it's good to see you again today. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule and finding time to be on WCNTV.
Oh, Rob, it's an honor to be with you.
Thank you. You wrote a book back in, I think, 2015, wasn't it? Rise of the Tyrants? Actually, it's actually volume 2 of a book, Change to Chains. I have a hard time saying that. The 6,000-year quest for global power.
Yes. Matter of fact, the first book I wrote, the Change to Chains, I had
That's it.
An idea, and it was to examine all the civilizations that have ever existed on planet Earth. We're trying to figure out what's the most common form of government. And so I went back to the beginning of the invention of writing, Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley around 2500 BC. And lo and behold, the records show that it was in the Fertile Crescent, there in Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, that we have the records of the first civilizations. And so there's Nimrod, Tower of Babel, and then Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk or Iraq. And then you have the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians. And I began to trace it out and find out, hands down, the most common form of government is a king. That power wants to concentrate into the hands of one person. And you notice the dynamics. The first invention ever was the plow. The Bible talks about Cain being a tiller of the soil. And then people started hitting each other with them, and they turned into weapons. And then people felt insecure, and they gravitated together for protection and formed the first cities. Now, when people get together, someone's a little better at knowing how to fight than the rest. And everyone says, you be our captain. And it's great. He organizes you, you fight, you win, you live. That's a good thing. But then this captain has kids and grandkids who claim to be an elite class, a special family, sort of a political machine with a boss. And before you know it, you've got like a mob leader, a gang leader, you have a king. And it's a pyramid structure to society where if you're friends with the king, you're more equal. If you're not friends with the king, you're less equal. And if you're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason, or you're a slave. And so as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger. Why? Because with military advancements, you can kill more people, right? So instead of killing with a rock, you kill with a bronze weapon or an iron weapon or a long phalanx spear the Greeks had, or the Parthian shot where they would use a small bow and arrow on the back of a horse. And then the Muslims had scimitar swords, and then gunpowder came from China. And the weapon changes, but it's that same fallen nature of Cain killing Abel. And then you have these global empires of Portugal, and then Spain, and then France, and ultimately England. So the King of England was a globalist. He was a one world government guy. And so when America's founders broke away, they were breaking away from someone who had an empire that spanned the world. The sun never set on the British Empire. They had Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana. They had India, a quarter of the world's population, Barbados, Bermuda, Canada, and America. And so America's founders decided they did not like this king telling them what to do. Kings would always want to insert themselves between you and God. And so you got Nebuchadnezzar saying, when I blow my trumpet, you bow to my statue. I don't care if you have a warm feeling in your heart for my statue. You bow or you're going to go into the fiery furnace. But then you have the King of England saying, okay, you got to believe the way I tell you to believe. Otherwise, I'm going to burn you at the stake, right? Like, William Tyndall or whatever. And so America's founders broke away and flipped it and made the people the king. I go through in another book, The Rise of the Tyrant, the study of the rare attempts throughout history to rule without a king. And they are rare, they are few, and it's an interesting dynamic. And if you want, I can get into that, Rob.
Yeah, give us kind of a brief, or not even brief, just an outline of the those rare occasions.
So if you can think of power as a line, as a spectrum, one side is total government, the other side is no government. Total government, power concentrates into the hands of one person, a king. It's sort of like a black hole, in astronomy, and the magnetism is so strong it even sucks in light. And so the kings rule through fear. You do what they say or they kill you. Well, the other side of the spectrum is no government, and no government would be anarchy. It would be chaos unless every single person is taught the law. And that's where you have the ancient Israel idea. But even Plato and others said the people had to be virtuous. So it's sort of like a teeter-totter. If you have more internal restraints, you can maintain order with fewer external restraints. But if you get rid of the internal restraints, you have to maintain order with more external restraints. It's sort of like a parent tells the teenager, you can hear the keys to the car, you can drive around and come home whenever you want because you're a good kid. You have internal morals. You're going to do what's right. But if you don't do what's right and you hang around the wrong kids and drink and drive and party, you're going to be pulled over by the police and thrown in jail and controlled behind bars. So, teenager, you are going to be controlled, either voluntarily from the inside or forcibly from the outside. It's the same way with a nation. We're either going to be voluntarily controlled with internal morals, or we're going to teach our kids there's no right, there's no wrong. You don't even know what sex you are anymore. It's totally subjective. You can kill your own babies. There's no morals. And then we put these kids out on the street. What do we expect them to do? Right? There's no right, there's no wrong. And you're going to have domestic insecurity. You're going to have crime. And then everyone's going to say, well, we need somebody to restore order. And that's when power concentrates and someone comes along and says, I'll fix it. I just need you to give me your rights and power in this emergency and I'll restore order. And you're back to a king. And so the first rendition of this was ancient Israel. So in studying the 6,000 years of recorded history back to Sumerian cuneiform, you see there's kings and pharaohs and Caesars and Kaisers and sultans and czars, but one nation stands out. It's an anomaly. It's ancient Israel. When Israel comes out of Egypt around 1400 BC, for 400 years, they do not have a king. And so this is the period before they get King Saul. And so Israel, you had this system where every single person was taught the law. It was like everybody downloaded a behavioral app on their iPhone. Instead of a GPS app telling you where to turn, it's a behavioral app telling you how to act, right? Don't steal that and don't yell at that other person. And the Levites were the computer geeks that help you to download this app, right? Line by line, precept upon precept, go to the Apple Store here and Google Play and press this button and that button. And so everybody downloads this behavioral app. But the big question is, why would you follow it? What would actually motivate you to follow this internal moral? Ancient Israel introduced the key ingredient. There is a God who is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair, and he is going to hold you accountable in the future. So you're about to steal, nobody's around, you know you can get away with it, and then you think, God is watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates something in your head called a conscience. And so you can maintain order in society with no police because every person is taught the law and every person is aware of God and accountable to God. Now, God knew that people would sin and blow it, and rather than them walking around with a guilty conscience forever, once a year, the Israelites sacrificed the lamb on the Day of Atonement, brought the blood in, sprinkled it on the mercy seat, and everyone's sins were forgiven for the next year. And then with the Christian fulfillment of that, Jesus is our lamb, and he sacrificed himself on the cross to pay for our sins. And so we can have approach God without a guilty conscience. And we thank God for that. But we still are accountable to God. He still has his perfect law. And if we love him, we want to not kill people and not steal and so forth. But back to ancient Israel. So their system worked for 400 years until the priest stopped teaching it. And you have this story of a priest, a Levite, in the house of a guy named Micah, and he has a graven image, a silver graven image. And then the tribe of Dan comes along, steals the silver graven image and tells this Levite, hey, you can come along and be a priest for our whole tribe with this graven image. And you're scratching your head thinking, what's this Levite doing with a silver graven image? Isn't that one of the commandments? You're not supposed to have them. And then you have this other story of a Levite with a concubine. The law says the Levite is to marry a virgin of his own tribe. And here he is, a Levite he's not even married. And so it shows the priests weren't living the law and they weren't teaching the law. And this particular story, the guy's traveling with this concubine. They're at a house and they're surrounded by sodomites who are not content with doing their behavior in their own bedrooms. They want to force it on everyone else. They bang on the door. The hard-hearted Levite shoves the poor girl out. She gets raped to death. And by the time you're grossed out with the story, you read this line, every man did that which was right in their own eyes. Why? Because the priests had stopped teaching them what was right in the Lord's eyes. It turned into this chaos, right? You know, whatever you want to do, there's no, every man, you know, you're a boy today, girl tomorrow, there's no morals, there's no value, and it turns into this chaos. And all the people go to Samuel the prophet and they say, this self-government system is not working anymore. We want to be like all the other countries. We want a king. Samuel cries and the Lord tells Samuel, they did not reject you, they rejected me. And God says, you want a king? I'll give you a king. He's going to take away your best land, give it to his favorites. He's going to take your sons, make them run before his chariot, take your daughters, make them be cooks. He's going to determine the fate of your lives. And God showed them how upset he was by destroying all their crops. And lightning and thunder and all the people come to Samuel and said, we sinned by asking for a king. And he said, yeah, you did, but God's still going to work out his perfect plan. And now we have this King Saul. And it's an interesting story that Saul is pouting that his son Jonathan made a league with David. And Saul is pouting, saying, none of you soldiers care about me. And this guy, Doeg the Edomite, says, King, I care about you. I was actually at the city of Nob, and the priests there gave David some bread and the sword of Goliath. Saul says, bring those priests here. Turns to his men, says, kill them. The men hesitate. Doeg the Edomite says, I'll kill them, and goes out there and kills them all. What just happened? The soldiers had been operating under the old system where every individual is accountable to God to follow the law. And the law says you need 2 or more witnesses before you condemn somebody to death. There's only one witness, Doeg. And so they're hesitating. They still have a conscience. Well, this does not compute. Doeg says, King, I'm going to surrender my conscience to you. You tell me to kill, I'll kill. You tell me there's no more male, female, fine. You tell me that I can kill babies, you can tell. Whatever you say, government, I'm going to surrender my conscience to you. And so this is the dynamic that we see that took place with ancient Israel. And now, this period of transition was called the Hebrew Republic, and then it switched into where it had a monarchy. then is this okay, Rob? I don't want to.
Yeah, this is good. This is good. Bring some parallels though to. I can see where this. I can see where you can easily make some parallels here to what's happening today.
So I tell people history is not prophetic, but it is predictive. Past behavior is the best indicator of future performance. Whether you're going to hire somebody or whether you're going to invest in a stock, what do? You look at the past behavior. And so we can get an insight into it. Now, throughout all these kings and pharaohs and Caesars, Israel's experiment went from about 1400 BC up to around 1000 BC. It was this 400-year period. But let's fast forward several hundred years to Greece. So Athens. Athens was a city-state, and it had a king named Draco. And he had ruled by his whims and caprices. He was a despot with arbitrary power, like you read that definition. And it was totally unpredictable for the people of Athens. And so they go to this King Draco and they say, look, King, at least write these rules down so we can have some order in our lives. And so he does. And it's the first written laws of Athens, but it's the death penalty for every other thing. And so they're called draconian laws. And that's where we get this concept of, oh man, they're really, really strict laws with the terrible penalty if they're draconian. Well, that goes back to King Draco. Anyway, Draco dies, and Athens gets a new king named Solon, Solon, Solon. He invents democracy, and then he leaves town, so they have to do it. Demos means people, krasi means rule, and so there's 6,000 citizens of Athens, and they get together and they meet in the marketplace and they decide what's going to happen for the city. And now Plato lived at this time, actually a couple centuries later, and Plato writes about the dynamics of a city government. And he said it would go through 5 stages. The first stage is rule of the capable. Now, these are citizens that know how to run farms. They know how to run businesses. They're just really responsible people. They know how to run city governments. They know how to balance the books. He calls this the rule of the capable, and they're lovers of principle and truth. And they do a good job. The city grows. And another group wants to get involved in politics, and Plato called them lovers of fame. These are people that don't actually have experience running anything. They just want to be famous. And they see how the first group is in front of everybody, and they get all the attention, and they love attention. So the second group, these lovers of fame, they may be a Greek athlete that won the Olympics, or maybe a Greek actor from their theater, and everybody knows their name. And so this second group, these lovers of fame, get involved in politics. And because they love fame so much, they hate being defamed. And so they will sway based on the winds of public opinion. And maybe like a Hollywood actor that gets elected governor of California.
We've seen that many times.
And you think, what did he run before he became the governor of this enormous state? Not even a village. He ran nothing. He was just a famous actor. And so because they don't have experience running anything, balancing the books, they yield to what Plato called avarice, selfishness. And they can't help but funnel money to friends and funnel money to supporters and use their position to funnel favors to all those that like them. And before you know it, it turns into a third category. And Plato called it lovers of money. And these are an insider clique, sort of a deep state ruling class. And if you're friends with them, you don't get prosecuted, or you can break all kinds of crimes, and it's just nobody pays attention. But if you're not part of their group, they will throw the book at you, right? And so it's this favored class. Now, in Plato's 5 stages, he says the people will eventually get rid of this lovers of money class, and they'll set up a democracy. And Plato explains a democracy is the most charming form of government. It's like a bazaar where you can, marketplace where you can buy any viewpoint. It's like an embroidery patchwork with lots of different colors. And he says the chief characteristic of a democracy is tolerance. So you go from lovers of principle and truth, lovers of fame and honor, lovers of money, to now it's lovers of tolerance. And everybody tolerates each other. It's wonderful. And then they tolerate people that are a little bit off. Then they tolerate people that are a lot off. Until finally they're tolerating crooks and crime and fraud. And he says, some criminal gets, a judgment against him. And he walks around the street. Nobody cares. And so it turns into this lawlessness. Plato says that it creeps into the family, and the sons are disrespectful to the fathers. It creeps into the schools, and the teachers want to be on the same level as the students. And then he says it creeps into their morality. And the young man gives into libertinism and useless and unnecessary pleasures, even incest and unnatural union. Yes, that's what he's talking about. Same thing that happened with ancient Israel. And it turns into this moralless society. And then they see the city treasury sitting there with money. And they say, hey, it's a democracy. Let's just vote to spread the wealth around. Now the treasury's empty. And then they say, where can we get more money? The rich people. And then they just vote to take the money from the rich people. Now they have a shortage. And they say, well, don't cut back on what I'm used to getting. Well, don't cut back on my welfare or my Social Security or what my favorite benefits and food stamps or whatever. And it turns into this bickering and chaos and fighting in the streets. And finally, the people say, can't someone come along and fix this mess? And that's when somebody comes along, and they're all smiles, and they promise everything to everybody. They're very eloquent, and people yield their freedom to him. And he begins to get a little too powerful, and they cast it in his teeth. And he's like, I got my pen and my phone. I'm going to do whatever I want. And he has a choice. Either give up some of the power that he has accumulated or get rid of the people confronting him. And so he purges his administration and his military of anybody that has virtue, anybody with morals. All he wants is yes men, sort of like King Saul and with his dog, the Edomite. He just wants people that'll obey him. And what does he do with the other ones? He uses the government to falsely accuse them, and he brings them in and kills them. And then who does he get to be his new friends? He frees the criminals and the convicts and frees the slaves and brings in the illegal immigrants, and he arms them, and they become his mob that he sends around to attack anybody that attacks him politically. And before you know it, he stands in the chariot of state holding the reins of power, and he's revealed as the tyrant. So Plato says that democracy without morals and virtue ends in chaos, out of which a tyrant will arise.
I think I can come up with at least one example of who that might describe, just from our recent American history. So we're going to take a break here, but we are talking with William J. Federer of AmericanMinute.com, and we're specifically discussing tyranny and Bill's book, Rise of the Tyrant. So I think we have about a 2-minute break coming up. If we're ready for that, we can plug that in, and we'll be right back.
This is Leighton Howerton for Tin Cup Ministries. Well, I'm out at the old barn, the stables, a very fitting place for an old mule like me at the Angel Theater Ranch here in Montana. And I'm grateful to the Stevens for allowing me to be here and at their theater to work, record out of, and take a respite from, to really focus in on what God's doing in the ministry. One of the things that God's been up to in the ministry is that over the years I've had the privilege of writing stories and articles for different publications throughout the country. And presently, I'm writing as a monthly contributor for the Wisconsin Christian News. It's an incredible newspaper with a very gifted and loving and kind editor and publisher by the name of Rob Pugh. I love Rob. He's given me this great honor by sharing some of my insights from the road as I travel in ministry around the country each month. I finished one yesterday for him. I want you to know something. If you will go check out WisconsinChristianNews.com, you'll be able to read some of the finest material you've ever laid your eyes on, and I hope that your mind and your heart will receive all the fine words that the writers, the contributing writers there, are in every month to help you in your walk. It is a definite plus to your life. It's a newspaper that talks about real issues, things that we need to not only deal with, but be actively involved with that are going on in our society today. So I would encourage you to check it out. Once again, that's the WisconsinChristianNews.com. That's their site, and you can find out all the information about their ministry there. You know, as a storyteller, I realize every one of us has a story. But it's not just our story, it's God's story. So let me encourage you today to share your story because of that reason. God wants your story to come to life because it's part of His grand story. And all the things that go on in this world, there are folks that need to know and need to experience the life story that you have. Because let me tell you something. It's God's great love story, not just for us, but for everyone. For He wants and desires everyone to come to know real life, true life, eternal life through His Son, Jesus Christ. Guys, I'm going to mule up here in a minute and get on with my day. I encourage you to do so too. Check it out, WisconsinChristianNews.com.
Okay, so that was our good friend Leighton Howerton. He's a national recording artist. He's a pastor, teacher, speaker, just all-around great guy and one of my best friends, telling you a little bit about what we do at Wisconsin Christian News. We are now today speaking with William J. Federer of the American Minute. And Bill, welcome back to the show. We've learned a lot already here in this first half hour. So,
well, I'm always thrilled to be with you.
You're a great teacher. Continue, if you would, sir.
Well, I wanted to mention that the information I'm talking about is in two books. One is called Change to Chains, the 6,000-Year Quest for Global Control. And the other is Rise of the Tyrant. And it's Democracies and Republics in History, How They Rose, How They Fell. And one of the stories that I thought would be interesting is Machiavelli. He lived in Italy 500 years ago. Italy was not Italy. Italy was a bunch of city-states. Venice, Genoa, Naples, Florence, Siena, and they all had armies and navies and fought. And Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop this infighting. So he writes a book called The Prince, where he advocates the ends justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is such a good end that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. So if a prince conquers a city in his quest to unify Italy, and the city doesn't want to be conquered, they would hate him. But if the prince pays criminals to kill cows and burn barns and smash windows and set fires, the people will cry out for help. The prince will come in and kill the very criminals he bribed. Nobody will know the better for it, and everyone will praise the prince as a hero. So it's good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house and set it on fire, and then you go around the front of the house and sell them a fire extinguisher. And
never let a good crisis go to waste.
Exactly. It's Rahm Emanuel, the campaign advisor there for, or actually it was on chief of staff for President Obama. But he said, never let a good crisis go to waste. It's an opportunity to push your agenda. So it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on crises to consolidate control. So the idea is that, like we talked about ancient Israel and ancient Greece, and when there's domestic chaos, people are willing to let go of their freedoms and power concentrates into the hands of a King Saul or a dictator. If it's a natural phenomenon, they just want to take it the next step and create the crises. Rather than wait for a crisis to happen, let's egg it along. And so Machiavelli influenced someone named Hegel, Hegel, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Now, who is he? So France has a revolution, and Napoleon takes charge and conquers Europe. 6 million people die. Afterwards, Napoleon is, abdicates and banished to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. But the king of Prussia, Germany wasn't Germany. Germany was a bunch of kingdoms, and they were Bavaria and Saxony and Prussia, and they had armies and they fought. And so the King of Prussia says, we can't let a Napoleon conquer us like we just experienced. We need to strengthen the state. And so the professor, Hegel, at the University of Berlin, was the guy to give the philosophical backing for strengthening the state. And Hegel said, the state is God walking on earth. The state is our mortal God. And he gets into that. But he takes Machiavelli's idea and turns it into a triangle. And one corner is a thesis. The opposite corner is an antithesis or antithesis. And the top corner is a synthesis. It sounds complicated, but it's not. In other words, you start off with a status quo and you create a crisis. And when it's really, really bad crises, the people will be happy to settle for your answer that's just half as bad, and that's the synthesis, right? So have status quo, create a really bad crisis, everybody's happy to settle for your answer that's just half as bad. And then that synthesis becomes the new thesis starting point, and you do it again. And you create another crisis that's real bad, and everybody's happy to settle for your answer that's half as bad. And then that becomes the new starting point. You just do it over and over and over again. This actually inspired Charles Darwin with his evolution of species and the struggle and so forth. But this inspired Karl Marx. And Karl Marx says, okay, status quo, how do you create the antithesis? You send in organizers, and they would organize the proletariat against the bourgeois, which is the working class against the business owners. You would organize the blacks against the whites, the Muslims against the Christians, the Catholics against the Protestants. They would organize the Hutus against the Tutsis in the Congo and Rwanda. They really don't care who the two sides are, and they really don't care what the issues are. Their issue is the revolution. They want a destabilizing crisis that causes everyone to panic so bad that they knee-jerk reaction, surrender all their freedoms to somebody promising to restore order. 45 countries fell to communism this way. And so this inspired somebody named Saul Alinsky. Who was Saul Alinsky? He rode around in Chicago with Al Capone's hitman, Frank Nitti. And he saw how all you had to do was kill a few people, smash a few windows, and the whole neighborhood would panic and submit to the mob and pay extortion protection money. And so Saul Alinsky applied this to politics. And he wrote his Reveille for Radicals and then Rules for Radicals. And there was a young female politician who did her senior thesis in college at Wellesley College on Saul Alinsky. Her name was Hillary Clinton. And there was another young guy who was a Saul Alinsky community organizer in Chicago who started his political career that way. His name was Barack Obama. So Saul Alinsky, he said that a community organizer's job is to first have disorganization, that he must identify crises and fan the flames of hostility to the point of overt expression. The community organizer must rub raw the resentments of the people of the community. He must search out controversy rather than avoid it, because without controversy, the people are not motivated enough to act. And so this is the politics that has been enacted in America for the last decade and a half. This intentional use of creating or capitalizing on a crisis as an opportunity to usurp power from the people and to institute more big government programs. And as you mentioned in the intro, we've seen, now this doesn't mean every single crisis was planned, but it's definitely taken advantage of. There's killings all the time. It's a terrible tragedy, but they will find a couple particular ones if it fits their agenda, and they fan the flames of this through media until it reaches this fevered pitch, and then they will want to push through some agenda. And so this, again, is the politics that we've been experiencing in America. So you and I, when a crisis happens, we think, how can we help people get through this? When they see a crisis happen, they think, how can I use this to push my agenda, to take more rights and freedoms away from the people and institute more top-down control? So here we have a coronavirus situation, and there's two parts to it. One is the actual disease. The second is our form of government. Now, we want to help people that have the coronavirus, and I did have it, and for 3 weeks I was sweating in bed. It was not comfortable.
I had it too. Very similar, and my wife.
Well, God bless you.
So
And so the thought is that as bad as that experience was, when I think of the 8 years of the Revolutionary War and the thousands that died, and then the thousands that died defending America, and the World War I and World War II, and the millions that died, and that they died to give us freedoms. And so we want to address the health situation, but we do not want to surrender our form of government. And so that's where we need to pull back and say, well, let's not panic. You know, the kingdom of this world operates through fear. God's kingdom operates through faith, and they're mutually exclusive. You can't have fear and faith at the same time. And so the world system, they want to get people into panic, into this mode of surrendering. But one of the founding fathers says, whoever surrenders freedom for security will get neither. And so our founder said, no, we'll take the risk. But we want to pass to our kids and grandkids a country with freedom. Now, in the specific instance, we have an example of Sweden. Sweden did not do any lockdowns, and their coronavirus rate is extremely low. And they just tell people, hey, you be responsible. If you're an older person, take it upon yourself to stay inside, and, keep your distance from people. And it's the idea of trust the people to do what's right, rather than
I think Japan was the same situation. I was just reading that. No lockdowns. They had a total of 853 cases, and it's over. So,
yeah. And now, there is quite an interesting amount of evidence that, we talked about create or capitalize on a crisis. There was a bioterrorism lab in Wuhan that was doing work with coronaviruses and with bats. And Ted Cruz, U.S. Senator from Texas, actually read the budget during the previous presidential administration, where our government sent $3.7 million to this lab in Wuhan so they could experiment with the coronaviruses with bats. It's like,
yes,
what was going on with this?
Yeah, I think Anthony Fauci had something to do with that as well. So.
And even there was a Nobel Prize winner that said, yes, it did. They were working on this lab, but it was accidentally released. And they tried to, backpedal on that. So there are some facts that look like they're, and then you add some other things together. There's a presidential election coming up. One party does not have a very strong candidate. Sometimes with the mental situation of this candidate, it says some pretty embarrassing things. And the other party has a candidate that is very strong. And so if you cannot defeat a candidate, you want to do some other methods to try to win an election. And it's interesting, when you look at America's history, whenever there is a financial panic, whoever is president during the financial panic is usually voted out. The biggest example is Herbert Hoover. Who was Herbert Hoover? He was an international businessman, and he went to Stanford University, got involved with mining in Australia, and then he took part ownership. He'd run a mine and get an ownership interest, and then he ended up growing. He had offices in London and in New York and around the world, and he had mines in India and China, and he became an international businessman. And then World War I starts, and you have thousands and millions of displaced people in Europe. And so the government, Woodrow Wilson, asks Herbert Hoover to go over there. And so he organizes private relief with businesses and charities to feed these people. And then there's a 1927 Mississippi River flood that's so bad it breaks the levees, and tens of thousands of people are displaced in America. There is no FEMA. There is no government emergency response group. And so Herbert Hoover organizes charitable organizations and businesses to come to the rescue. And he is so popular, he's swept in as president. He's in 8 months, and there's a crisis. The stock market crashes. And he begins to work the same thing. Private organizations, let the states get involved and everything. And the Democrat Party thwarted all of his efforts. Why? Because they wanted him to take the blame for the Depression, get voted out. And then they had a new candidate named Franklin Roosevelt, who says the big government is going to come to the rescue. We're going to have work programs. We're going to have the government do this and the government do that. We're going to consolidate power. And Franklin Roosevelt ended up consolidating so much power that he got reelected once, twice, 3 times. He was president for 12 years. They finally had to pass the 22nd Amendment afterwards, limiting a president to just 2 terms. But there was this enormous concentration. He's the one who pushed through the income tax, the progressive income tax. Prior to FDR, only the top 1% paid income tax. And but anyway, so we see this concept in America. Elections coming up. If they can pin a financial collapse on the president, there is a strong indication that maybe that he won't get reelected. One other point, but I'll pause there, Rob, and see if you have a comment on it.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit more than that, though. I just can't see how the alternative would be better than the financial collapse. You're just asking for trouble, but go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so I obviously am pro-life, and so the president has been the most pro-life president that we've ever had. I support Israel's right to exist, and the president is very strong in supporting Israel. And I also believe in God, and the president has been very vocal in believing in God and having the days of prayer and mentioning Christianity. And I've actually talked to several pastors who have prayed with the president. And so that is my particular beliefs that I hold. Anyway, I mentioned Karl Marx earlier. Karl Marx and a guy named Frederick Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto around 1848. And Frederick Engels talked about how to get rid of the middle class. So you want to just have the socialist system. Socialism means there's 2 classes, the ruling class and the ruled class. The state planners that plan everything, and then the common people who are all equal, and because the government owns all the property and the government owns everything, and there's these 2 classes. And so Engels says we have to get rid of the middle class. And he says that that they were alchemists of the revolution, that they had to stir up artificial crises. And each crisis must be worse than the one before and put out of business more small capitalists. And he says this will increase the number of unemployed. It'll cause a financial collapse that'll bring about a revolution. So here, the socialist tactic is what? Get rid of the middle class, get rid of the small businesses. And so you look at what's happening now, that this coronavirus response is what? Get rid of the small businesses. Let's drag out these shutdowns just long enough so they all go belly up. And
so how is this, Mike? I guess my question is, how is this allowed to be taking place now under Donald Trump, who was elected on nationalism and, make America great again, presented himself as not a globalist, and yet all these, as to use your term, all these draconian measures are taken. Some of these state governors are just insane. Look at the governor of Michigan or Illinois, just as a couple.
Right. And the fear is, gee, what if one of those governors was sitting in the White House? That's what's at stake with this election. So Trump is sort of holding back the deep state. Now, what's the deep state? When a president gets in, he can replace his cabinet. But underneath of the cabinet, you have departments that are all government unions, and you just cannot fire people. And so President Obama, there's like 8,000 positions in these top government agencies that carry out all of the federal government, about 8,000 positions. The previous president put in about 7,000 of them. And so if you cannot push a string. And so here you have President Trump wanting to push his viewpoint that everybody elected him on. And he's got these deep state bureaucrats that don't want to carry it out. And they are thwarting his efforts and even sabotaging them with all these different leaks and so forth. And we saw that with the military, where he said no transgendered stuff in the military. And enough of the previous president's appointees were in the military, and they're like, no, we don't want to change it. And the same thing with immigration. And he says, we're not going to have any more of these, illegals coming in from, Muslim terrorist countries. And you have those that try to stop that. So I feel like if I were to look back in history for an example, you have ancient Israel, ancient Judah, actually. And there was a king named Manasseh, and he was wicked. And he was sacrificing children to Moloch, this pagan god. And the prophets came to King Manasseh and says, you're filling the streets of Jerusalem with the blood of these innocent children. You're doing the same thing that the nations that were here before Israel did. And I brought Israel in to judge them and drive them out. And now that you're doing them, I'm going to drive you out. So the judgment was pronounced on Judah for killing these innocent children. Well, then Manasseh has a grandson named Josiah. Young boy, when he becomes a king, when he becomes a teenager, he tells him to clean out the temple that his granddad had trashed. And then the workers come out of the temple with the law. They find this old scroll and they read it. It's the law of God. And it's the first time many of them hear it. They read it to this young king Josiah. And when he hears it, he rips his garments and repents. And he sends a message to a prophetess in town named Huldah. She was the wife of the king's tailor, and said, what's going to happen? And she says, tell the man that sent you that judgment will come, but not during his lifetime, because his heart was tender when he heard the words of the Lord and he repented. And so sure enough, for the rest of the 31-year reign of Josiah, there was peace and prosperity in Judah. He had the priests go out and teach the law. He tore down the Sodomite temples. He was pushing this revival. But when he died, it went down the drain really fast. And I sort of feel like we're in a Josiah period. And as long as we repent and rend our hearts and get back to God's word and turn to the Lord, he'll put off whatever is there. But if we go back to business as usual, and if we don't turn to the Lord, he is a just God after all. And if he doesn't judge the sin, his silence is actually giving consent to the sin, right? In law, silence equals consent. And
we're definitely at a turning point, kind of on the precipice of, can almost go either way. What is your take, Bill? Do you think America is going to survive as a sovereign nation, or are we going to be sucked into a one world globalist system?
Well, that's sort of what I hint on in these two books, is to give a direction, a trajectory, so to speak.
Because the reason I ask that is that, with the coronavirus lockdown, there were 124 countries that everybody, I don't know how you get 124 countries to just lockstep follow orders and lock everybody down, but that's what happened. And it seems like that's where Bill Gates and some of the others are heading us.
Yeah, whether it's this crisis or one or two down the road, with 5G technology, with tracking, contact tracing, with the government or with these big tech people being able in China with 20 million cameras on the street with facial recognition and with social credits, so that They keep track of how all of your shopping and all of your internet searches and all of your wherever you travel. And if you are not supportive enough of the government, all of those numbers are run through a cruncher, an algorithm, and it comes out with this number of how loyal you are to the Communist Party. If your number's too low, you can't even buy a ticket on a train. And so they even said that if you can snitch on a Christian Bible study, then your social credit score will go up, right? I mean, they actually give an incentive to do this. And but so they want to put a net of satellites around the earth. They want to put up 5G everywhere, and they want to track everybody. So whether or not we're at that place, you can see, going back to Nimrod Tower, but you look at this history, Nimrod, Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar, Genghis Khan had an army of 500,000 men, and he killed 30 million people across Central Asia. Imagine if Genghis Khan had never died. He would have been happy to conquer the world. Napoleon would have been happy to conquer the world. Mao Zedong kills 80 million. He would have been. And so it's almost like a blessing that these guys die off. And then when the devil went to Jesus and said, bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world because they're all mine to give. They've been delivered unto me. He's like, when were they delivered to Satan? When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. The Bible, God gave Adam and Eve charge of the garden, but then when they sinned, the Bible says, to whomever you yield your members servants to obey, to him you are a servant. So the moment Adam obeyed Satan, he basically put the devil on the top. And so all these world governments that are run as a pyramid and top down, ruled through fear, that's what the devil was offering. And thank God, Jesus said, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. But this world system, we can track it. And in the geometry, there's something called the Fibonacci sequence, or phi. It's a rate of geometric expansion. And you observe it in a seashell, where it does the little circle, little bigger circle, little big. You observe it in the water going down a drain, does that circle, a tornado or a hurricane or a galaxy, the spinning, And so I applied this in my study of these empires throughout history. And you go from small to bigger to bigger to biggest. And so you go from Nimrod Tower of Babel, then Gilgamesh, and then pharaohs, and then, Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar and Attila the Hun. You keep going bigger and bigger. Clearly, there's a global goal in mind. And it's the same fallen nature of Cain killing Abel. It's just using the most modern technology to do it. Augustus Caesar wanted to have a worldwide tracking system. It was called the census. Here, for the first time ever, Augustus Caesar wanted to track everyone that was under his thumb. But now it's just using technology. So you can see the direction it's going. Now, I do believe that every generation has had a crisis, and the crisis gives us a chance to show what's in our heart. And so, this is our particular crisis. I don't know if it's the end, but you can sort of see where it's headed. But from God's point of view, he wants to see what's in our heart. Are we going to sit? There's three groups of people: those that make things happen, those that watch things happen, and those that wonder what happened. Right?
Amen.
And so God calls us to be those that make things happen. He wants us to be on the front lines and to say, Lord, use me in this time of crisis. Why? Because in times of crisis, people turn to Christ. Times of crisis, power concentrates into the hands, right, of the government, but it's also in times of crisis that people turn to Christ. So it's sort of like they happen at the same time. And so I believe there'll be a great revival of people turning to Christ in the times of crises. The same time the devil, it says that you'll bruise his heel, but he'll crush your head. And so the devil does his attack, but God turns around and has a greater good that comes out of it.
Right. This is an opportunity for us, folks. So let's not blow it. Bill, we are out of time, believe it or not. That went fast. But let's just we're going to go a little bit longer here. If we can just show Bill's website, whoever's running the system there. It is AmericanMinute.com. And if we can scroll down there and just kind of let folks see what's there, a lot of resources. Are you doing speaking? Well, I suppose like everyone else, you're kind of canceled for now.
Yeah, 3 months canceled, but
It's amazing what you can do by technology, though.
it is, and I thank you for having me on. And I have been starting to get requests to speak in the states that are open. So I'll be going to
Great.
Oklahoma and Texas and some others.
Great. And people can find you on, well, they can get links on your website to the YouTube channel and some of your other programs.
Right, AmericanMinute.com.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill. Next week, we are going to have a special guest, Deborah DeGroff. She's an author. She'll be joining us to talk about what's inside a children's book. And you don't want to miss this one. You are going to be shocked at what you didn't know, but you will know after we're done next week. But that's it for today on WCNTV. Thank you, Bill Federer. It was a great program, and we have learned a lot here. Folks, if you would share this with all your friends and family, wherever you can get it out, share it far and wide, and let's educate people. We are at a turning point, and we have an opportunity here to make a difference. God bless. Bye.